Office Revenge Hub welcomes you. Enjoy today's story.
I was forgotten by management, overlooked for every opportunity, invisible despite holding the entire operation together. They didn't think twice about me until the day everything I'd been quietly maintaining started falling apart. By then, it was way too late. My name is Casey Brennan, and for 11 years I worked as the operations manager at Ridgway Manufacturing, a precision parts supplier based outside Pittsburgh. We made components for aerospace, medical devices, automotive systems, the kind of parts where a millimeter of deviation means the difference between a functional product and a catastrophic failure. When I started at Ridgway, we had one facility with about 80 employees, modest revenues, and a reputation for quality work delivered on time. I came to Ridgway straight out of a technical program with a degree in industrial engineering and supply chain management. I wasn't looking for glory or executive track positions. I just wanted to do good work in manufacturing, an industry I'd grown up around. My father had been a machinist, and I'd spent summers as a teenager in fabrication shops, learning to read blueprints and understand tolerances. Manufacturing felt like home to me. My role at Ridgway was coordinating everything between sales, production, quality control, and shipping. When a customer order came in, I made sure we had the materials, that production schedules were optimized, that quality checks happened at the right stages, that finished parts shipped on time. It's the kind of work that's invisible when it goes well and catastrophic when it doesn't. The culture at Ridgway in those early years was practical and straightforward. The founder and CEO, Martin Ridgway, was an engineer who'd started the company in his garage 30 years earlier. He understood manufacturing deeply, respected the people doing the work, made decisions based on operational reality rather than financial abstractions. Morning production meetings were focused on solving actual problems. If a machine was down or a supplier was late or a quality issue emerged, we'd figure it out together. I loved that environment. I worked long hours because I cared about the outcome, not because anyone demanded it. I'd stay late to troubleshoot a production bottleneck or come in early to coordinate a rush order. I built relationships with our suppliers, learned the capabilities and quirks of every machine in our facility, and developed systems for tracking orders and preventing the small errors that cascade into big problems. My first few years, Ridgway grew steadily. We added customers in new industries, expanded our equipment, hired more machinists and engineers. By year 5, we doubled our revenue and added a second shift. Martin promoted me from coordinator to operations manager, gave me real authority over production scheduling and process improvement. I implemented lean manufacturing principles, reduced waste, improved our on-time delivery rate from 86% to 98%. I cross-trained workers so we had flexibility when someone was sick or orders spiked. I negotiated better terms with suppliers and built redundancy into our supply chain so a single vendor problem wouldn't shut us down. The work wasn't flashy, but it made Ridgway more reliable and more profitable. Martin appreciated what I did, at least initially. He'd stop by my desk to ask about a production issue or get my input on whether we could handle a challenging order. He'd mention in company meetings that our operational improvements were a big part of why customers kept coming back. It felt like my contributions mattered. Then Martin started talking about succession planning. He was approaching 70, wanted to transition toward retirement, needed to bring in professional management to take Ridgway to the next level. He hired a consulting firm to help identify and recruit executive talent. About 8 months later, he announced that Ridgway had a new chief operating officer, a guy named Derek Hastings. Derek came from a large manufacturing conglomerate. He had an MBA from a top program, spoke confidently about scaling operations and driving efficiency. Martin introduced him at an all-hands meeting as the person who'd lead Ridgway's next phase of growth. Derek would oversee all operations, report directly to Martin, and eventually potentially become CEO when Martin fully retired. I was Derek's direct report now. My first meeting with him, I walked him through everything: our production processes, our customer base, our supply chain relationships, the systems I'd built for managing orders and preventing problems. Derek listened, asked a few questions, seemed reasonably engaged. At the end of the meeting, he thanked me for the overview and said he looked forward to working together. But something felt off from the beginning. Derek didn't really want to understand how things worked. He wanted to implement what he'd learned at his previous company, systems and metrics that had worked in a different context with different products and customers. He started mandating reports and dashboards that required hours of data entry but didn't actually help us make better decisions. He brought in consultants to analyze our processes, people who'd never worked in precision manufacturing, who'd make recommendations that sounded good in PowerPoint but were impractical on the shop floor. I tried to adapt. I generated the reports Derek wanted, attended the meetings with consultants, explained why certain recommendations wouldn't work for our specific operations. Derek would nod politely and then proceed as if I hadn't said anything. The bigger problem was that Derek didn't seem to see me as a peer or valued colleague, while I was just the person who'd been there before him, someone managing the details while he focused on strategy. In executive meetings, he'd present operational improvements that I'd actually designed and implemented as if they were his initiatives. He'd bring in external consultants to analyze problems I'd already identified and solved, then credit the consultants for their insights. I'd speak up in meetings with suggestions or concerns, and Derek would acknowledge me with a brief thanks and move on without actually engaging with what I'd said. But if one of the consultants, or someone he'd brought in from outside, made essentially the same point, he'd spend 15 minutes discussing it and assigning action items. I started to feel invisible, like I was there to execute Derek's vision, not to contribute my own expertise or insights. While after 11 years of building Ridgway's operational systems, I'd become just another person who reported to the important new executive. About a year into Derek's tenure, Martin announced he was transitioning to chairman and Derek was becoming CEO. Martin would still own the company, but would step back from day-to-day operations. Derek was in charge now. One of Derek's first acts as CEO was restructuring the leadership team. He brought in a VP of operations from his former company, a guy named Philip Chen. Philip would oversee all production, quality, and supply chain functions. I'd now report to Philip, who reported to Derek. I'd been pushed down another layer in the organization. Philip had manufacturing experience, but in high-volume consumer products, not precision components. His instinct was always to push for speed and cost reduction, which works when you're making thousands of identical widgets, but is dangerous when you're making parts where quality and reliability are critical. I tried to explain the difference, but Philip viewed my caution as resistance to change. The operational changes started coming fast. Philip implemented new production scheduling software that was supposed to optimize efficiency but didn't account for the setup time and calibration requirements of our precision work. He negotiated cheaper contracts with suppliers I'd carefully vetted for quality and reliability, bringing in vendors who offered lower prices but inconsistent materials. He pushed to reduce quality checkpoints in our process to save time and labor costs. I objected to these changes, documented why they'd create problems, presented data on the likely consequences. Philip dismissed my concerns as old-school thinking, resistance to modernization. Derek backed Philip completely. Within 6 months, the problems I'd predicted started appearing. Defect rates increased. Customer complaints came in about parts that didn't meet specifications. Delivery times slipped because the new scheduling system created bottlenecks. We had to scrap entire production runs because the cheaper materials didn't meet tolerances. I'd bring these issues to Philip, suggest we revert to processes that had worked reliably for years. He'd tell me to find workarounds, to make the new systems function rather than criticizing them. When customers complained directly to Derek, he'd ask Philip what went wrong. Philip would blame production workers for not adapting to new processes or suppliers for inconsistent quality, never acknowledging that the problems stemmed from his own decisions. The thing that really broke me was when we lost our largest customer. Aerotech Industries had been with Ridgway for 9 years, represented about 18% of our revenue. They made flight control components for commercial aircraft and were absolutely unforgiving about quality standards. I'd personally managed that relationship, had never missed a delivery, never had a quality rejection. Under the new system, we delivered a batch of parts to Aerotech that had dimensional issues. Minor deviations, but in aerospace, minor means unacceptable. Aerotech rejected the entire order, conducted an audit of our quality processes, and decided to move their business to a competitor. We lost a multi-million-dollar annual contract because Philip's cost-cutting had compromised the quality that relationship was built on. Derek called an emergency executive meeting to discuss the Aerotech loss. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from my assistant, who'd seen it on Derek's calendar. The operations manager who'd built and maintained that customer relationship for 9 years wasn't considered important enough to include in the post-mortem discussion. I went to Philip and asked to be included. He said Derek wanted to keep the meeting small and focused on strategic leadership. I could provide a written summary of the operational issues if I wanted. That was the moment I realized I'd been completely forgotten. And despite 11 years of keeping Ridgway's operations running smoothly, despite building the systems that had enabled the company's growth, despite maintaining the customer relationships that generated the revenue, I was now just a mid-level manager who executed what leadership decided. My expertise, my experience, my institutional knowledge, none of it mattered to Derek and Philip. I provided the written summary. It was detailed and honest. I outlined how the quality failure stemmed directly from the process changes and supplier switches Philip had implemented. I showed data on how defect rates had increased, how customer complaints had risen, how our on-time delivery performance had declined. I recommended specific corrective actions to restore our operational excellence. My report was apparently discussed briefly in the meeting and dismissed as defensive blame shifting. Philip sent me an email afterward saying they decided to bring in an external quality consultant to conduct a comprehensive review and develop improvement recommendations. The consultant's fee was probably more than my annual salary. Over the next few months, my role continued to diminish. Philip hired 2 managers from his previous company, putting them in positions overseeing quality and supply chain, areas I'd been managing. I was relegated to production scheduling, basically a coordinator role despite my operations manager title. The new managers implemented more changes, often contradicting each other, creating confusion and inefficiency. I stopped trying to fight it. I did what I was told, generated the reports required, attended meetings when invited. I became exactly what they apparently wanted me to be. A quiet, competent executor who didn't challenge leadership decisions. The irony was that as I became less engaged, more problems emerged. The new managers didn't understand our equipment, our customer requirements, our supply chain vulnerabilities. They'd make decisions that seemed reasonable on paper but were disasters in practice. Then they'd need me to fix the problems, to use my relationships with suppliers or my knowledge of our machines to salvage situations they'd created. I'd solve the immediate crisis and they'd thank me briefly before moving on without acknowledging the root cause. It became a pattern. Leadership would create a problem through poor decisions. I'd quietly fix it. They'd take credit for the resolution or simply move on to the next initiative. My performance reviews became perfunctory: meets expectations, solid contributor, good technical skills, but limited strategic thinking. The same phrases that mean you're valued for execution, but not seen as leadership material. My raises barely kept pace with inflation. I was making less in real terms in year 11 than I had in year 8. I started seriously considering leaving. I was 51 years old, had been in manufacturing my entire career, had deep expertise, but no executive title or prestigious credentials. The job market for someone in my position was limited. I'd probably have to take a lateral move or even a step down to join another company. The thought of starting over somewhere else, of having to prove myself again after 11 years of excellent work, was exhausting. I decided to stay at Ridgeway but disengage emotionally. I'd do my job competently, collect my paycheck, stop caring about whether leadership appreciated my contributions. It was soul-crushing, but it felt like my only option. Then something unexpected happened. One of our newer customers, a medical device manufacturer called Biomed Innovations, had an urgent problem. They had a product launch scheduled in 4 months, and their current parts supplier had catastrophically failed a quality audit. They needed a new supplier who could produce highly complex components to extremely tight tolerances, deliver them reliably, and get qualified in their supply chain quickly. Biomed reached out to Ridgeway because of our reputation in precision manufacturing. Derek saw this as a huge opportunity. Biomed was a fast-growing company with venture backing, exactly the kind of prestigious client that could elevate Ridgeway's profile. He told Philip to make this work, whatever it took. Philip assigned the Biomed project to one of his new managers, the VP of quality he'd brought in. 3 weeks into the project, it was already going sideways. The quality VP didn't understand the specifications, had committed to a timeline that was unrealistic, and hadn't properly assessed whether our equipment could achieve the required tolerances. Biomed was getting frustrated. They'd invested time in qualifying Ridgeway, and now we looked like we couldn't deliver. Derek was furious, demanding daily updates, threatening Philip's job if they lost this opportunity. Philip finally came to me, desperate. He asked if I could take over the Biomed project, get it back on track, salvage the relationship. He framed it as giving me an opportunity to demonstrate leadership on a critical initiative. I thought about saying no, about letting Philip and his team fail, about letting Derek see the consequences of forgetting the people who actually knew how to run the operation. But that would have hurt Ridgeway's workers, people I'd worked with for years, and would have damaged our reputation with a customer. So I said yes. But I had conditions. I wanted complete authority over the project, no second guessing from Philip's other managers. I wanted direct access to Derek for critical decisions, and I wanted my involvement and contribution to be properly acknowledged, not disappeared into some executive's presentation to the board. Now Philip agreed immediately. He was too desperate to negotiate. I spent the weekend reviewing everything about the Biomed project, the technical specifications, the timeline commitments, the production plan the quality VP had developed. It was worse than I'd thought. We couldn't meet the specs with our current setup, couldn't hit the timeline with the production approach they'd planned, and hadn't even properly qualified the materials. Monday morning, I called Biomed's engineering director, a woman named Dr. Sarah Vance. I was honest with her, told her the previous plan wouldn't work, that I needed to restart our approach, that I believed we could deliver what they needed, but on a revised timeline and with some specification clarifications. Sarah appreciated the honesty. Yeah, she said their previous supplier had overpromised and underdelivered, which had created their current crisis. She'd rather have realistic commitments from Ridgeway than another disaster. We worked together to refine the specifications, identifying where we had flexibility and where tolerances were absolute. I visited Biomed's facility to understand how our parts integrated with their device, what failure modes they were most concerned about. I brought our most experienced machinists into the planning process, getting their input on how to achieve the challenging requirements. I rebuilt the production plan from scratch, identified the specific equipment we'd need, the tooling we'd have to purchase, the testing protocols required. I worked directly with our best suppliers, the ones I'd built relationships with over a decade, explaining the critical nature of material quality for this application. The project consumed me for 3 months, 80-hour weeks, constant problem solving, meticulous attention to every detail. But it worked. We produced sample parts that met Biomed's specifications. We passed their qualification audits. We delivered the initial production run on the revised timeline with 0 defects. Biomed was thrilled. Sarah told Derek this was the best supplier relationship she'd ever experienced, that Ridgeway's technical expertise and reliability were exactly what they needed. Biomed signed a 3-year contract worth over $5 million annually, with potential for significant growth as their products scaled. Derek sent a company-wide email celebrating the Biomed win. He praised Philip's leadership in turning around a challenging situation. He thanked the quality VP for his technical expertise. He mentioned the team's hard work. My name appeared once in a list of contributors, alongside machinists and purchasing staff. I'd spent 3 months salvaging a disaster that Philip's team had created, had built a relationship with a strategic customer through technical expertise and reliability, had secured the largest new contract in Ridgeway's recent history. And I got the same level of recognition as someone who'd ordered materials. That's when I stopped being sad about being forgotten and started getting angry. The productive kind of anger that turns into action. I'd proven I could manage complex technical programs and build customer relationships at the highest level. Biomed valued my expertise even if Ridgeway's leadership didn't. That was information I could use. I started documenting everything I knew about Ridgeway's operations. The customer relationships I'd built, the supplier contacts, the production processes I'd developed, the quality systems, the equipment capabilities, not to steal anything, just to understand exactly what value I'd created that walked out the door with me if I left. I also started having conversations outside Ridgeway. I'd stayed in touch with customers over the years, had built genuine relationships beyond just business transactions. I reached out to several, just checking in, hearing about their challenges. Multiple conversations led to them expressing frustration with their current suppliers and asking if I knew anyone reliable. I reached out to former Ridgeway employees who'd left over the years, people who'd been pushed out or marginalized as Derek restructured. Several had started their own small manufacturing businesses or joined competitors. We'd compare notes about the industry, talk about operational challenges. One of those conversations was with Tom Reeves, who'd been Ridgeway's engineering manager before Derek brought in his own people. Tom had left and started a small precision machine shop, doing prototype work and small production runs. He was good at the technical work, but struggled with the business side, customer acquisition, operations management. We met for coffee and Tom vented about his challenges. He had the skills and equipment to do excellent work, but couldn't scale because he didn't have systems for managing multiple projects simultaneously or relationships with larger customers who could provide steady volume. I told him I had exactly those capabilities, that I'd spent 11 years building operation systems and customer relationships, that I knew how to manage complex projects and deliver reliability. Tom asked directly, would I be interested in partnering with him, combining his technical capabilities and equipment with my operational expertise and customer relationships? It was the question I'd been hoping he'd ask, but hadn't wanted to propose myself. I thought about it for exactly one day. Then I told Tom yes. We spent the next month planning in secret. Tom would maintain his existing shop and be responsible for production. I'd bring operational systems, customer relationships, and business management. We'd start small, taking on projects we could handle with Tom's current capacity, and grow carefully as we brought in revenue. The hardest part was figuring out how to do this ethically. I couldn't solicit Ridgway's customers while still employed there. I couldn't use proprietary information, but I could leave Ridgway, wait out any non-compete period in my employment contract, and then reach out to my network as an independent professional. I reviewed my employment agreement carefully. I had a 6-month non-compete that prevented me from working for direct competitors or soliciting Ridgway customers, but it didn't prevent me from starting my own business after 6 months, or from customers reaching out to me. I gave Ridgway my notice on a Tuesday morning. 2 weeks, professional and clean. Philip seemed genuinely surprised. He asked why I was leaving. I kept it vague, said I'd been presented with an opportunity that was a better fit for this stage of my career. Derek called me into his office, asked the same question. I gave the same non-answer. He said he was sorry to lose me, that I'd been a solid contributor, that he wished me well. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. 11 years, and that's all I got. A brief expression of vague regret from someone who couldn't even remember most of what I'd done. My last 2 weeks at Ridgway were spent documenting processes and transitioning responsibilities. Philip asked if I'd be available for consulting after I left if they had questions. I said I'd consider it depending on my new commitments, but didn't commit to anything. I walked out of Ridgway for the last time on a Friday afternoon. A few colleagues took me out for goodbye drinks, people who'd worked with me for years and genuinely appreciated the partnership. Philip and Derek didn't attend. I wasn't important enough for their time. The 6 months of non-compete were challenging financially. I'd saved some money and my spouse's income covered basics, but we had to cut back significantly. I used the time productively, though. I helped Tom refine his operations, build systems for project management and quality control. I took some consulting projects in non-competing industries, building my independent reputation. I stayed in touch with my network, letting people know I was transitioning to independent work. And the day my non-compete expired, I officially launched our new company. We called it Precision Partners Manufacturing. Small, independent, focused on exactly the kind of complex precision work where Ridgway had built its original reputation. I started reaching out to my network, not aggressively selling, just letting people know I was available for projects. The response was overwhelming. Multiple customers I'd worked with at Ridgway were frustrated with quality issues or delivery problems. They asked if Precision Partners could help. Our first client was a small aerospace supplier I'd worked with in my Ridgway days. They had a production problem their current supplier couldn't solve. I visited their facility, understood the challenge, designed a solution using Tom's equipment and my process knowledge. We delivered parts that exceeded their specifications on time and on budget. They were thrilled. That success led to referrals. Within 3 months, Precision Partners had 6 active clients and a healthy pipeline. Within 6 months, we'd hired 3 machinists and a quality technician. The work was demanding, but Tom and I were building something based on technical excellence and customer relationships, not corporate politics and executive ego. Then Sarah Vance from Biomed called me. She said Ridgway's quality on the contract I'd managed had declined significantly. Defect rates were up, delivery reliability had dropped, the communication and responsiveness she'd valued were gone. Biomed was considering alternative suppliers. I told Sarah about Precision Partners, just that we were small but specialized in exactly the kind of precision work Biomed needed. She was interested. She visited our facility, reviewed our capabilities, checked our references. Then Biomed gave us a trial order for a smaller component. We executed flawlessly. Biomed was impressed. They started shifting more work to Precision Partners, reducing their dependence on Ridgway. Within a year, we'd taken over about 40% of Biomed's component sourcing, work that had been going to Ridgway. Other customers followed similar patterns. Companies I'd built relationships with at Ridgway were frustrated with declining quality and service. They'd reach out asking if I could help. Some projects were too large for Precision Partners to handle, but many were exactly our sweet spot. Complex, precision work where technical expertise and reliability mattered more than scale. 2 years after leaving Ridgway, Precision Partners was generating over $3 million in annual revenue with 12 employees. We were profitable, growing steadily, and building a reputation for excellence. Tom and I had built something we were proud of, something that reflected our values and expertise. I started hearing through industry contacts that Ridgway was struggling. They'd lost several major customers due to quality problems. Their on-time delivery rate, which I'd maintained above 95%, had dropped to 78%. Employee turnover was high as experienced workers left for better opportunities. The operational excellence that had been Ridgway's competitive advantage had evaporated. Then I got a call from Martin Ridgway, the founder. He'd stayed on as chairman but had been largely absent from operations since Derek took over. He asked to meet for coffee. I was curious enough to agree. Martin was direct. He said Ridgway was in serious trouble, that customers were leaving, quality was terrible, the operational systems I'd built had fallen apart, that he'd made a mistake bringing in Derek, that Derek's corporate playbook approach had destroyed what made Ridgway successful, that he'd specifically made a mistake not recognizing and protecting my contributions. He asked if I'd consider coming back to Ridgway as COO or even CEO to rebuild what had been broken. He'd essentially be asking me to save the company he'd founded, and Derek had run into the ground. I let him finish. Then I politely declined. I told Martin I'd built something of my own that I was proud of, working with a partner I trusted, serving customers who valued what we provided. I had no interest in returning to fix problems that stemmed from leadership's choice to ignore expertise and prioritize politics over performance. Martin looked defeated. He said he understood, that he regretted not fighting harder to keep me when Derek was pushing me aside. He asked if there was anything Ridgway could do to make this right. I thought about it. Then I said there was one thing. Ridgway still had some excellent machinists and engineers, people I'd worked with for years who were stuck in a failing company. If Ridgway was serious about making amends, they could facilitate those people finding better opportunities, including potentially with Precision Partners if they were interested. Martin agreed. Over the next few months, 3 of Ridgway's best people reached out about joining Precision Partners. We hired 2 of them, carefully ensuring we weren't violating any agreements or poaching improperly. These were experienced professionals making their own career decisions to join a company where their expertise would be valued. Meanwhile, Ridgway's decline continued. Derek was eventually forced out by the board. Philip left shortly after. Martin tried to stabilize the company, but the damage was extensive. Customers had lost trust, Employees had lost faith, and the operational capabilities that had taken decades to build had been destroyed in a few years of poor leadership. Ridgway eventually sold to a larger manufacturing conglomerate at a fraction of what it would have been worth before Derek's tenure. The Ridgway name was retired, absorbed into the acquiring company's brand. A 70-year-old company, founded on excellence and reliability, had been destroyed by leaders who forgot that operational excellence comes from people, not PowerPoints. 3 years after leaving Ridgway, Precision Partners was doing over $8 million in annual revenue with 28 employees. We'd become the preferred supplier for several major customers in aerospace and medical devices. Our quality was impeccable. Our delivery reliability was unmatched, and our reputation for technical problem solving was attracting clients who needed partners, not just vendors. I occasionally saw Derek at industry events. Now, he'd taken a position at another manufacturing company and was apparently repeating similar patterns. He'd congratulate me awkwardly on Precision Partners' success, say something about how he'd always known I was talented. I'd be polite but brief. I didn't need his validation, and I certainly didn't need to pretend his leadership had been anything other than destructive. The real satisfaction wasn't Ridgway's failure. It was building something that proved what I'd been saying all along. That operational excellence matters. That technical expertise and customer relationships are more valuable than corporate credentials and management buzzwords. That the people actually doing the work often understand it better than the executives making strategic decisions from conference rooms. Or Ridgway forgot me because they confused my lack of executive polish with lack of value, because they assumed someone without an MBA or corporate pedigree couldn't be strategic, because they prioritized image over competence. They paid for that mistake by losing the operational capabilities that had made them successful, by watching customers leave for competitors who actually understood precision manufacturing, by eventually selling their company for far less than it was worth. I didn't destroy Ridgway. Derek and Philip did that themselves by dismantling systems they didn't understand and ignoring people who did. I just built an alternative that demonstrated what happens when you actually value expertise and operational excellence. The lesson I learned wasn't that forgotten people always get revenge or that bad leaders always fail. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes politics and credentials do prevail over competence. But I learned that being forgotten by your current employer doesn't mean being forgotten by your customers, your network, or the industry. That the value you create is portable, even if your current organization doesn't recognize it. That sometimes the best response to being overlooked isn't fighting for recognition, it's building something where recognition becomes irrelevant because results speak for themselves. 4 years after leaving Ridgway, I run a successful company, work with great people, serve customers who appreciate what we do, and do it all on terms I helped define. The people who forgot me are managing the consequences of a company they hollowed out through neglect and arrogance. They forgot me, one which meant they also forgot everything I'd been maintaining. Turns out you can't just forget the person holding everything together and expect it to keep working. Eventually, reality catches up. Their regret doesn't give me satisfaction, my success does. Not because it proved them wrong, though it did, but because it proved me right. That expertise matters, that relationships matter, that operational excellence isn't just corporate jargon, it's the actual work of making things reliably and building trust with customers. I survived being forgotten, then I thrived by making it irrelevant, and that's better than any revenge. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.